Hand it over there.
Hello, everybody. We're very excited to see such a fabulous turnout. I was just over at the Morton Memorial Library in Rhinecliff, and they were also having an art opening, and it was based on the rails, and that's some of the things that we're going to be talking about. And so it was wonderful to have two art openings to go to. It was wonderful. It was like being in New York City. I was thinking, running one from one gallery to the next. Sophisticated.
And there's also one at Vassar right this minute.
I couldn't get there. I couldn't get to
too
Poughkeepsie.
far away. I didn't know that that one either.
But it really feels vibrant and wonderful, and that's what we're hoping that programs like the Big Read, where our various cultural centers, our libraries, and our colleges are joining together with community organizations to use culture and the arts as a real community builder and as an economic driver, and so that when we got this National Endowment of the Arts grant last year, we won the grant, I think, because it was an unusual collaboration between colleges and 5 relatively small libraries. A lot of these grants go to very big libraries, and or they go to just a community library, like Red Hook's Big Read a couple of years ago. But what was really wonderful about this is that we were working not just with librarians with BARD, but those librarians were working with each other in a really new and collaborative way. So our library partners that I need to thank, because some of them are here in the audience, if I don't thank them, I'll get yelled at. Tivoli, Red Hook, Germantown, Kingston, and Rhinecliff are our library partners. The Center for Civic Engagement is the office that has hosted the Big Read at BARD, and we worked together for the past 6 months to put on 35 events. So over these 6 weeks, we are hosting 35 various events, and the whole idea is for everybody to do a community Big Read, which is why we're here tonight, because we're going to talk about this marvelous book by Marilynne Robinson. And the only way that you can make anything work if you have a grant is through volunteers. And so all of us who are participating from Red Hook Can and from the libraries and from BARD, we're all volunteering our time. But what's been kind of amazing about the we're all on committees, and we all live in these communities, and we have a reason why we might offer our hand in this. But Anne Margaret Daniels emailed me out of the blue. We'd actually never met, even though she's a BARD faculty member. She's a faculty member with the BARD Prison Initiative. Emailed me and said, "I love that you're doing this, and I think that this is so amazing, and I would love to help you." And I fell out of my chair first, and after somebody revived me from the floor, which is really dusty. If you've ever been in my office, it's a little shabby chic. So after I got dusted off, I responded, and I said immediately, "Of course." And this came to mind, doing a book discussion, and she said, "Well, I live in Woodstock, and I'm going to mention it to my bookstore." And so the Golden Notebook in Woodstock now has a display of Robinson. So it sort of did what it's supposed to. Right there is the sort of the sort of encouragement of community and connection. Even across a river, the ripple effect. So it was a lovely thing, and of course I immediately Googled her, and she not only was she volunteering, but she was an expert volunteer as a writer herself and as a faculty member, and so I wanted to just thank her for taking the time, because that's really what we needed. And I'm going to now turn the floor to her, because she is really going to be our discussant. She's going to facilitate a conversation about this book. And I just have to say, in case you didn't love the book, I have been now almost to 20 book discussions over the last couple of weeks, and I really did like the book when I read it. My book club did not so much like the book, but as we discussed it, they came to enjoy it, and at the end everyone agreed that it was obviously, like, the language in the book, obviously as a writer, but the sort of the themes in the book. But each time I go to another event, I'm falling deeper and deeper in love with this book, and so and almost with Marilyn Robinson, because I've also heard about her nonfiction, and so much now has been opened up just in these various discussions, and even discussions where the same themes are being reviewed. So it's just lovely that everyone's here, and if you have the opportunity to go to some other events, which I'm now going to shamelessly plug.
But not tomorrow, because
we're not going to talk about the upstate screening tomorrow at noon for housekeeping, in case you can jet over there and jet back. But we do have James Wood, who's a literary critic and writes for The New Yorker. He's going to be on campus next week on the 16th, discussing Marilyn Robinson's book, not just housekeeping, but her work in general. He is also going to be speaking at the Bard Prison Initiative, because the Bard students in the Prison Initiative program are reading the book as well. We are also hosting what we're calling My Name is Ruth, the first line from the book. Neil Gaiman and Mary Caponegro and Nicole Quinn are going to be reading from the book, and the book and there will be a discussion, and that's going to be at the Performing Arts Center on the 23rd of April.
Shakespeare.
Oh, see?
So I didn't get to read the book, but saw the movie. Martin had it, and saw the movie. How much will I know about the discussion? Well, how true to the book was it?
That I know.
That's something that we can talk about once we get rolling.
Okay.
So that's, I think, a good time for me to turn over the.
Thank you,
Just
Erin.
listen.
Thanks, Erin.
Thank you.
Thank you very much. Well, yes, it's I suppose it's always not difficult but different to start out with a book where there's also a movie, and where some people have seen the movie version and some people have read the book. I combated this last spring when I was teaching The Great Gatsby in one of my classes, and the Baz Luhrmann movie had just come out.
But is
And-
there 3 versions of that now?
Oh, I think there have been 6 or 7 versions of Gatsby since the 1920s, but it's it's my students would say, "Is this what really happens in the book?" And all I could do was gently say, "Read the book, because the order is such that the book comes before the movie in this case." So here's your template of what you have is the movie in your head, and it's not a wrong order, I think, and it's almost an inevitable order sometimes today. The movies get made so fast that you don't have time to read the books before suddenly you see now a major motion picture. So let them complement each other, and take from both of them, take from both versions, if you will, of the story, what means the most to you, things that you like, things that you don't. I have a picture of Ruth in my head. I confess that by the time I got to the point where her sister was actually using her name repeatedly very late in the book, I'd entirely forgotten what her name was. My name's Ruth, and I was just reading on I. It wasn't like Scout Finch, and that for me is the most powerful thing about this book, is it's a classic child narrator who's not quite a child, because you find out when you come to the end of the novel that this is a much older person who is a survivor, who is writing from a different place, looking back at her childhood. But as is the case with Scout, who, for my money, Scout Finch in To Kill a Mockingbird is the most remarkable child narrator I probably have ever read. The ability to not freeze you in the past or the present or the future, for that matter, is something that Ruth does really, really powerfully. I think it helps to have a sibling. In Scout's case, she has an older brother. In Ruth's case, she has a younger sister, but she has a whole family full of women and of absent men. She has a family full of women. Her grandmother, her mother, who is present and then absent, her mother's youngest sister with the beautiful, beautiful long hair, the pretty, careless, I think passionate youngest sister who comes back to take care of the 2 girls after 2 older women, their dead father's sisters, fail her. fail them. And ultimately, Lucille, who has to make her own way, and Sylvia and Ruth together. That's kind of where I wanted to start out talking tonight about the fact that these women of so many different ages. I think Sylvia, the grandmother, is 76 when she dies. The girls are small still. How old is Helen when she dies? Not old. Not old, certainly, in her mid-30s. When Sylvie comes back, we find that she's, I think, 34 or 35 when she comes back to care for the children, the girls at that point. So a real mix of ages of women and these absent men. That's what I was struck by the most at the start of this novel, and I wondered if that was an experience that you guys shared. I see lots of nodding going on, and I'd like to run this as a discussion as best we can. I know you have things you want to say about the book, and I'm here to moderate and not pontificate.
I'm just going to interrupt 1 second.
Yes.
Does anyone want me to turn the fan on? No? Okay. That's fine.
Are we
I just want to be sure.
if anyone starts to get warm, just
Let me know.
give her a high sign.
Yeah.
Yeah. Okay.
Definitely a book about generations and the impact of the various generations, and especially the parallel between Helen and Sylvie is very strong.
Well, I mean, literally a book about generations, about who begets who. The father, for instance, makes just a fleeting appearance as a physical presence in this book. But what do we know about him? He's a Methodist. He wears suspenders. He knows where wildflowers grow, and he can hike all day in the mountains. And I mean, the landscape, the terrain of Fingerbone itself, the mountains of Fingerbone and the lake are like living characters in this novel, living or dead characters. And almost in the way that say, in Dickens's Our Mutual Friend, the Thames River is a character in, which one has Marshalsea Prison?
Bleak House. No.
No, it's not. It's anyway, Marshalsea Prison, the Big Debtor's Prison, is a character in that novel. And the trains. The trains, again, absent and present. This constant train that goes through the town, and the train that plunged into the lake, never to even be seen again. Not a bubble, not a gulp of oil, nothing. The only debris that comes up is a head of lettuce, a cushion, and something else. Nothing. Yeah. Oh, didn't you think of that as you were reading the story? But back to the idea of generating. He has begotten these children, and then he's still present in the lake. He's never come up again. So there's a sense that every time the girls go to the lake, every time they go out across the bridge walking on the lake, when Sylvie, late in the novel, takes Ruth and they row and they row and they row to the mystical place where the house is gone, and there's a hole where the cellar was and a smaller hole where the well was. Sylvie disappears, or does she, for the bulk of the day? You can't quite be sure. Time is very slippery in this story. He's never gone away. The father, Stone, this absent Stone, they've all got really cold names. He tries to insert himself back into this novel with that letter that Helen tears up into 4 pieces and then tells the girls that it doesn't matter. The men make some attempts, I think, to get back into the text in a way, but the traces of them in the girls that they have helped to engender is the most important thing about them. There's a gorgeous and terrifying moment when Ruth and Lucille take out the dictionary, and in them, the dead grandfather has placed a P for the pansies. Under O for orchid, he has pressed a lady slipper. And Ruth is charmed by this. She loves it. and Lucille rips the book from her hands and shakes all the flowers out so that the petals and the words won't be in the same place anymore. And this really hurts Ruth. They don't speak to each other for days. I mean, the effect that the men keep having on particularly the girls, but clearly also on Helen, Sylvie, the older women as well, is something that you can't forget, or that you can't get rid of as you read the novel. Sorry, I saw your
It's
hands.
like the stone gets thrown into the lake, and the ripples go ripples and ripples and ripples into the generations.
Yeah, that's a beautiful
Metaphor. Yeah.
way of putting it. You know, there are so many scenes where the lake is at once this, it's protean, it's the shapeshifter. That's an easy thing to say about a lake, I suppose, but it's, you're never quite sure how big it is. You know that it's up in the mountains in kind of a bowl over the town. You always feel that somewhere there's a dam or there's a ridge or there's a valley that could break. And indeed, we do see a flood at one point when there's been a lot of snow and rain. And the water comes up in the house. It's never very scary though, because it's kind of a quiet flood that then subsides, and at the end of the chapter, Ruth says, you know, and then the townspeople were suspicious and had never even touched our house. And she makes a point that their house is up on, bless you, that their house is up on a little hill, so that in the cellar there's never more than just a kind of a sponge of black water, I think, with a few skeletal insects skating across the surface as big. You know, you can see that the images are just, particularly the natural images, the images of critters and bones and rocks and flowers are so vital in this book. Even when she's describing a cold, dead landscape, it's so alive. It's terrifying, really, isn't it? Yeah.
What do you think it means that the author put that house so separate and untouched by the flood?
Oh, well, think of how many novels there are with the separate house, like the house on the outskirts of town. It just begs you to think of something like Carrie, or, you know, back to Kill a Mockingbird, the Radley house, which is in town and yet nobody goes near it. Bates, you know, it's on a hill, but it has the recipe for a horror story. It has all the notes for something really awful to happen. This house doesn't get a lot of visitors. Namely, people come to visit it when there's an illness, when there's been a death, when neighbors bring casseroles, and then toward the end, when Lucille has left, and when the town, which is always kind of an amorphous thing, you don't really get to meet many of the townspeople. They're just passing people with titles, and particularly the sheriff. You get to meet them when the threat is come that Sylvie and Ruth will be separated.
Church ladies.
Yeah, casseroles. There are a lot of casseroles in the course of the novel at particular times. But it's not a horror story at all. It's not a house of horrors. Even when Sylvie, who is, as the word that most often is applied to her, is transient. Even when the transient Sylvie, who after all stays there for many years, always ready to go, always sleeping with her clothes on and her shoes under the pillow, when she hoards the house full of rolled up newspapers and tin cans and bottles, and Ruth says, you know, I hope that the bottle obsession doesn't get to be much worse than this. She can flip it like that. And when the sheriff comes over, the word is spotless, this spotless parlor, ushered in, and wouldn't you like some coffee? Trying for normalcy. The house, even when stuffed full of clutter and potentially scary, is a wonderful place. There's a warmth there. You think of the jungle of roses outside. You are always kicked back, I think, constantly to the fact that the inside and the outside are almost the same in this house. There can be a warm fire in the winter, but think of how often they go out without coats and with wet feet. And Sylvie, who only has her loafers, I think I put on loafers today because I was thinking of her when I left the house, even in the rain. How much the inside and the outside get mixed up, and it's a good thing in this novel. It keeps the house vital, it keeps the house moving. When at the end Ruth sees the house in passing on the train from time to time, and it looks like someone new is living there. It might be Lucille. It might. There's no determination, but the orchard has been pruned and everything looks tidy. I don't want to go visit it either. I liked it the way it was. Yeah.
I sort of have a feeling that there's a trap there, though. That the
Well, there's literally that trap door, of course, where the
Yeah.
wall can't be having a door cut in it upstairs. There is literally a trap door up there,
Yeah.
but it's an awfully open trap. They
but-
don't ever seem to feel trapped in that house.
No, but Ruth ends up really encircled by, you know, the idea that mother can leave any time
Ah, yes.
is very frightening.
Yeah.
And in fact, when that happens, many times children can never leave their mother.
Mhm, mhm.
In other words, when there's always that threat, it's
Well-
often the time that the child is then, you know, clamped to that mother forever.
Well, there is certainly a way in which Sylvie, particularly for Ruth, becomes Helen. I mean, she replaces
Yeah.
her sister for the older of the two daughters, and I think for a time she does for Lucille, and then Lucille just reaches out straight into what feels to me. I mean, do we have a time fix on this novel? Can we have a decade? It's the way Lucille is described, sitting in the soda shop with her tight sweater and her jeans. It feels very kind of 1940s, maybe early 50s. But it's remarkable to me how little outside news. I just think of the age that we live in, but how little outside news and information makes its way into Fingerbone. You know, that somebody could be a sailor, that somebody could go away to some war. You know, is it World War II? Is it Korea? It's, you know, you kind of have a general fix on it, but this is, again, that's part of the slippery time in this novel. But I think when Sylvie threatens to leave, which the girls think she's going to do from the time she gets there, she doesn't leave until she's basically driven out. They have the burning, and then they hop a train, and that's, I mean, it's almost an American cliche, isn't it? The whole kind of what is it Huck Finn says, light out for the territories. You know, the fact that where you're living has gotten too settled, and Fingerbone has pushed as far west as you can. Remember where the father comes from. He comes from the Middle West with capital M, right? It's almost a Fitzgeraldian kind of Middle West, and then Fingerbone is the far west. And I guess there is somewhere else you could go. You could go into the Pacific and just keep going. But the westward movement in America, this is a deeply American novel. You know, the westward movement has kind of come to a stop. And what happens when you come to a stop is the movement starts turning back. Think of 1900. After there's no more Western frontier, what does Theodore Dreiser do in a novel like Sister Carrie? He has Carrie in a tiny, remote Wisconsin mill town. And he has her move first to Chicago, and then to New York. And then the rest of the novel is centered in New York, so it becomes kind of an eastward movement. And she gets there by train. Think of On the Road, you know, where it's just this aimless kind of crisscrossing nation motion. You fetch up in Mexico, and Mexico's even a disappointment, so you end up back in somewhere near Hoboken, you know. And the same kind of feeling is not just because of the train, which is such a force in this novel, but the freedom that two women have is surprising to me. That they can up and get on a boxcar, that they can up and hop a train and then just become transient in the way that traditionally in American literature male characters could
That's
do.
because there's no men there.
Yeah,
And now
Huck,
we won't.
okay. Because, you know, it's Huck and Jim on the raft. It's not Becky Thatcher, right? If a woman gets around, that's a bad thing in traditional novels, right? But here, there's such a freedom to it. And yet still, it's a train that passes through Fingerbone every so often. How far do you ever get away from this ghoulishly named town, after all? Yes.
Yeah,
Oh, please.
I didn't read the novel yet, but I would like to, which, I was inspired to, want to, having seen the movie. In any
Okay.
case, but in the movie, they get on a boxcar at some point,
Mhm.
even in the boxcar, there's another woman.
An Indian woman, specifically.
There's no
in
man,
the-
you know, you
Yeah,
think that
yeah,
who's hopping the boxcars,
yeah.
usually men, but.
Yeah, there are a number of references to hobos in here who are gendered as male. There's one really powerful scene where just as they're kind of on the cusp of, it's before Lucille has started complaining about her small breasts and getting very stroppy, right? So they're not quite grown-up girls yet, but Sylvie has told them, watch out for the hobos, don't go near them. She's given them a bit of a heads up. They're coming back through the woods and they smell the hobos' dinner cooking, and Ruth describes it as they're close enough to smell the fire, but the guys don't see them their way around. And she says they never bothered us anyway. But the cooking smell is, she says, kind of like rubber and kind of like rust, and and you're thinking about the can that thing must be. You can visualize it just from the details of smell that she gives. This is a novel that's just stuffed with the senses. There's a fair amount of visual, but there's a lot of odor, and there's a ton of touch and sound. The dogs barking and the ice crackling. Really, really powerful, scented story. And when I think of the hobos, I think of the campfire and I think of the Indian woman in the boxcar, actually, and the fact that it is a woman who's traveling, and in a way that's kind of an example. It's okay for her. She's not viewed as transient, she's viewed as nomadic, because of course where her tribe used to live, there's now a town like Fingerbone. It's land that has been supplanted by the mostly Anglo, but they call themselves American settlers who have come west and taken the land. So her home is the boxcar now. Yeah, I'm glad that they pick up. I haven't seen the movie, but I'm glad they picked up that detail in the movie.
I don't think it's an Indian woman, but it was a woman.
Oh, interesting. It is a
woman. Just described the freedom that two women were
Yeah.
hanging on to, our whole, breasting, and so even in the boxcar where well, anyway, I don't think it was an Indian woman, but it was a woman anyways.
Okay.
Again, the
Yeah.
absence of men, so.
Yeah, which is, the men who are here, like the sheriff, only seem to, I don't know if he causes trouble or spurs action in the end. The school principal the same way. I'm not sure quite how they work, really. They're complicators, certainly. Safe to say that. The only person who has a discernible date in the novel is Lucille, the redhead. Right? The one with the pretty hair. Neither one of them are pretty. The two old, what are they? Aunts-in-law? Anyway, the grandfather's sisters say neither one of the girls are very pretty, and that matters for a girl. I don't know, I didn't feel that. They both seemed so beautiful to me.
Because of
Ruth
the writing.
and Lucille, exactly, because of the writing. I know that one is tall and one is short. I know that one has red hair and one doesn't. And honestly, I can't tell you what their faces look like. There's just that one vivid description of Lucille when they're asking Sylvie, what was Mama like? It's shortly after she's come, they say, what was Helen like? What was Mama? And she says, well, Helen was, she was good in school, and she comes up with just a couple of very lame things the girls think. And Ruth has a beautiful retrospective where she says, if somebody asked me about Lucille, I could tell them, and she describes everything about this tiny little baby Lucille and the teeth falling out and exactly how she looked and how she presented herself. We get the idea that Lucille's kind of plump and curvy, and Ruth is very tall and lean, like Sylvie. Prototypically, they look kind of alike, because coming back from the lake, Ruth makes reference to a funhouse mirror and says, it always seemed to me that when people looked at us, they saw Lucille as the one that's been squashed, and me as the skinny one in the mirror. But we don't, in a way it's like Gatsby. Try to think of what Daisy Buchanan really looks like. At one point her hair is blonde, at one point it's brunette. We know she wears white dresses, because her name's Daisy, you know, I mean, but we don't really know physically what she looks like, how tall she is. We know that her voice is full of money, but we don't know what her face looks like, and I feel a bit the same way about these two girls. We can kind of imagine them as we want to, and the writing gives us so much possibility. The writing is so rich but not overwhelming. It's absolutely enjoyable. I think just the style that this book is written in. I was skeptical at the beginning when the first note is from Walker Percy, who knew his way around a word. And he says, housekeeping is a haunting dream of a story told in a language as sharp and clear as light and air and water. And I thought, well, nothing can really live up to that except for the moviegoer. And that's not just a blurb, that's actually true. Yes.
What I thought was amazing is that this was her first novel, and she wrote it and with no intention of publishing it, and she showed it to a friend who, without her knowing it, sent it to a publisher who then, of course, decided to publish it. So she had no intention of publishing this book. At least that's the way this story, that's the story lore at this point.
I was going to say, that's the way the story goes.
Yeah, that's the way the story goes. And that she didn't then publish another work of fiction for another, I think it was quite some time, like 16 years or something.
Gilead.
So
yeah.
It was a long time. And then she did two sort of boom, boom. But I just think it's amazing that this is a first time book, that this is, and that it really is her. I mean, it's the language, every sentence is, to deconstruct it is, you could read this book many times and never really get at it.
Yeah, and consistently in the natural descriptions, I found myself having to just stop, pull up, whoa, you can't skim this.
You know.
And you don't want to, but it's like trying to walk down that main street in Fingerbone that's full of mud, and you're trying to, and I mean this in a good way, where you're trying to figure out where to put your feet and you get them stuck and you have to back up. It's just the richness of it, and it pulls you down and makes you pay attention, you know, even if you don't want to. It's slim, don't be fooled,
Right.
you know. It's not slight. And that's, you know, that's a really good point. It's, you know, there's no reason we should disbelieve any of this, but yeah, I mean, how do you feel about that? A novel like this written for oneself. It really does put the writer much more in kind of a Ruthian position, doesn't it? It makes you feel a real kinship there, you know, which you often do between a writer and a title character, whether or not you want to. And then I did happen to notice, not until I had read the book many times, the dedication, which is dedicated to her husband and 4 sons. And I just thought, wow, you know, it's, golly, you know, where are all the men? Well, they're actually her family, you know. And then I stopped making kind of autobiographical connections, because I don't think that's particularly a good thing to do with a writer if the writer doesn't let themselves in for it and ask for it. But it did strike me. I did notice it, you know. Yeah, please.
Oh, I think she was here.
Oh.
She over here?
Sorry.
Yeah.
Happy of honor.
How old was she when she wrote this novel?
I'm not sure.
It was right after she finished her PhD. I think she was in her early 30s when
Yeah.
when it went off to the publisher by accident, or on purpose, but not through her. But I think she was.
I know she
wrote
had
it,
2 or maybe 3 sons by then.
By
She had
the
2 or
time.
3 children by then.
She was quite young.
Yeah.
And she was heavily influenced through her PhD, and she had kept track, I guess, of many American writers. You know, she was very, so a lot of what she was working out were themes based on writers that had come before her. So this was sort of an exercise for her, I think, of working out thoughts and ideas.
And you absolutely
from those,
feel that.
yeah.
You absolutely feel that. I mean, I've mentioned Twain and Fitzgerald, and Willa Cather, Theodore Dreiser. There's a lot more, and particularly writers of the Middle West, more than the West. You know, if she were writing this 10 or 15 years later, you'd have to throw in McCarthy, and you'd have to throw in some other writers. But she's she obviously is inhabiting. And particularly, I thought of Huck Finn. I think it was just the lake versus the river, you know, the body of water. There's a magnificent moment in Huck Finn where, there are many, but there's a moment in Huck Finn where there's a wrecked steamship. And there are a bunch of bad guys on it, and Huck and Jim, the raft, fetches up against it, and they go on to see what they can scavenge off the steamship. And they, there's a guy who's about to be shot by one of the other gang who think he's turned over some money, and Huck and Jim slip away, grab a couple of things, and then cut the skiff loose so that they won't be pursued by these people. And then they float away on the raft, and the steamboat, the next time they see it, it's running under the water. And it's the image, it's not unlike the train. The way she describes it, she says, you know, there's not really a sound when it goes into the water. It noses off like Helen's car, of course. It just heads off into the lake. And she said, like a weasel going off a rock, or like an eel. It just slides in and possibly keeps going. There's a wonderful image, a horrible image, but a wonderful image of the train just sort of continuing to run until it fetches up against one of the little islands that are actually mountaintops. Until it fetches up against one of those, this is a train, and they have no idea where it is. But it reminded me so of that powerful image of just the big castles of the paddle wheeler running under the water. You know, the Mississippi's so deep there that even as it's sinking, you can see it going, and Huck and Jim in the raft just skimming the surface, watching it go down. So yeah, Twain felt to me all over this novel, and also in a funny way. Fitzgerald, and even though I wanted him not to be here, Hemingway, you know, it's not just the mountains and the lake and everything, but it's kind of, I don't know, the way that Hemingway focused on men without women. This seemed to me, which is the name of one of his collections, it seemed to me focused on women without men. So it was sort of a flipped mirror. Please, thank you. You've been very patient.
I'm sorry. No, now that we're on this subject about you're comparing the novel to many other American novels and writing, and you said at the very beginning of the conversation about how you believe this is like, you know, truly an American novel. But besides, you've compared it in styles to many writers, in topic, and even in the sense of the actual geography of America, and the trains, which are so American in that sense, and the traveling and the rivers and the waters and the other writers. But what most in particular, why would you want to call it a truly American novel? And that's, you know, more, you've compared it in many levels, like
it's the setting. It's
the
setting that grounds them to one place, that kind of grounds me to one place.
And not the story
It
itself.
probably helps, or perhaps hurts, that my mother's family is from western North Carolina, deep up in the mountains, and has lived there for many, many, many years. And I am familiar with that sense of kind of inescapable place. You can get on the train and you can go as far as the country's boundary limits will permit you, you know, Seattle or Spokane, right? But you kind of get pulled back. This novel keeps coming back to Fingerbone. It's in the core, and it's inescapable. So for that reason, just the way that, you know, he's an American writer, but the way that you know, in something like The Sun Also Rises, the way that you dust Paris off you pretty quickly, and you're very grounded in the Spanish hills. You're very grounded in and around Pamplona. And that novel feels to me, it's about a bunch of expatriates, not all of them American. But it's, you know, Hemingway is a quintessentially American writer. You'll see that written about him. But that novel is not an American novel in the way that this is, just because of place, I think. Fingerbone is just so powerful in this.
So so
that's-
you're saying that the great American novel, in a sense, has to do with feeling entrapped within your
I think it
mind
does,
rather than
actually,
rather than the geography, because it's a huge place. I mean, I come from Puerto Rico and we are entrapped. But hello, I mean, you're saying that our mind won't let us evolve and go beyond, and then all these men that maybe could take us away, the beautiful
Oh, no,
things
no,
are
but-
not there.
But look at how, even though trapped by Fingerbone, look how the language transports you. Even if you never get any farther than the lake or a train that's just kind of shuttling back and forth and
No,
passing
but even the
through
language
Fingerbone
in an American novel
can carry you
can
out.
carry you away or keep you here.
Sure.
And that's the beauty of it, that maybe the language of the novel is a place
Mhm.
in the book,
Huh.
in the mind, but it also limits itself because it makes you travel, but it pulls you back. Or
Yeah.
it drowns you after all.
Oh, sure. There's always
Or it
that
floods
possibility.
you, like the flood is a soft flood, but you cannot get away from it. I mean, it's
Yeah.
still a flood. All these feelings, all these emotions, all this newness, let's go conquer, and then we're pulled right back again. Like you were saying, with the Dreiser story,
It's
and
like
then
Dorothy
she comes,
clicking her heels. There's no place like
Carrie
home. You
comes
can
back
go,
to
yeah.
the city, she
Yeah.
gets drowned by it. It's like we have all these opportunities, all this beauty, all this land, all this advancement, and then yet we get drowned by them ourselves because we cannot overcome them. We just keep on coming back to Fingerbone. What
I think a big part of the slight misnomer, the American dream, a big part of the American dream, whatever that means, and it's not always a positive construction in the slightest, it's always the dark side as well. The responsibility and the possibility, in fact, the probability of failure that comes along with possibility is a fabulous American dream novel. The whole novel is kind of a dream. The whole novel is so powerful in these suspended flights out into the woods,
Like
where they're
Hope Fiend?
never scared.
Same
They're never
thing.
scared. Even when she thinks Sylvie has gone off and left her, it's because they're in a place that used to be a human habitation. And that's the scary part for Ruth, the fact that there was a ruined house there, and when she's pulling up the floorboards with the snaggledy nails on them, and she thinks about children who, she takes a little comfort in the fact that children must have slept there, but the fact that the home is now destroyed terrifies her, and logically she goes to sleep, or maybe she passes out. I can't really tell, but Sylvie's there when she wakes up, and it was all a dream. This whole novel is such a blur sometimes of dream and reality. The girls are so small, they don't know what they remember correctly. For instance, the scenes in Helen's apartment with the downstairs neighbor, Bernice, are so vivid and so vividly told by Ruth that it's almost like she's an adult narrator. And yet then later, when she tries to think back, she can't recapture them as vividly as she does in that initial description. Yeah, that's a really great point about American mess. Yeah, thank you.
That resonated what you said to me, because I feel like the words and the place drown you, and you never get to know the people. And you are trapped back, you keep being trapped into the atmosphere, the sounds, the odors, and you never get to have the people. So I found it very unfulfilling. I found that the language was beautiful, but I wanted to have those people, to know them just a little. Not at all.
Not even your
at all.
narrator, not even Ruth
Not
and
even Ruth.
Lucille.
Not even
Yeah.
Ruth. Because Ruth's whole relationship to the book is a physical one with the place, with
Yeah.
the finger bone, with the air, with the. So.
What
I
about her
think-
connection to her aunt? What about Ruth and Sylvie together?
What about it? You
What
don't
about the
ever
two of
learn
them?
about it, except that it happens.
Well, why is her connection to Sylvie so powerful that she leaves Fingerbone really without a backward glance to go off and live a life on the road with this woman?
That's the tragedy of the book.
Or the beauty, depending on how you.
I think there's definitely a sense of a child that has been terribly compromised.
I think because she is the same as Sylvie, and she sees herself.
The same as Sylvie, you mean?
Yes, Ruth
Become
and
the
Sylvie.
same?
Yeah, that the same otherworldliness. What is it? What is it?
She has no other model, and Lucille is the one who's gone out into town and found something for another model.
It's
First,
not that it was a model. It's
Yeah.
that she recognizes herself in this other person. To me, but I don't see anything to say.
No, I think it's a perfectly legitimate complaint that there is a real barrier up to getting to know the characters well. We like to have characters and get to know them well. One of the most maddening things to me the first time I read To the Lighthouse by a writer I love was the way the house was a more important character than any of the people. You've gotten to know this family a bit, and the horror of it there is that Wolf gives you so much, and then just poof, she disposes of characters in parentheticals. So-and-so had a bomb fall on him in the trenches. Prue died in childbirth. And you, because you felt connected to them, and what she's doing is brutally showing you that modernism is not going to be like the Victorian novel, and things like plot, character, and setting are not to be relied on. Now, it seems to me, indeed, that Robinson goes too far into putting all of her eggs in the setting basket. I happen to really love a couple of the characters in here. Now, do I want to get to know the townspeople of Fingerbone better? Not particularly. Do I want to get to know Sylvie really better than I do? I think I do. I would like to know about this Fisher guy, maybe just a little bit. Although he doesn't seem important to her, why should he seem important to me? She's gentle, she has such a grace, she's always so polite. You never see her raise her voice, you never see her scream at the children. It's almost kind of like a Pippi Longstocking-ish existence for them, in that they're not, they are unparented, but they're not uncared for. Would you buy that as a construction of Sylvie?
No, I think they need more of a parent.
Well, admittedly, they're unparented, and you could say she does the best she can, but
Sure.
I'm not.
That's what we all do.
Quite sure. Yeah. But still, we're talking about the individual characters now, and it's hard to feel more invested, I think, than I just was in them, because, as you say, you don't really get to know them well. You know details about them, like Sylvie's beautiful long brown hair when she was a girl, and the fact that she's the untidy one, who the others are Helen and Molly, who's a kind of a blip on the radar screen and then goes off to be some kind of a missionary, are very fastidious, and Sylvie always has milk on her lip. Like, she can't even be bothered to have her milk mustache wiped off her lip. So we know some details about her, but we don't know much about her. You're absolutely right. And when it comes to plot, characters, and setting, this novel is setting. Immensely setting. Pretty, not exactly a pot boiler of a plot. You know, occasionally people go into the lake, and that's a memorable moment, you know. It's like, whoa, okay, there goes the train, and then when Helen's car sails in, but that's fairly early in the novel. And then you have about this much of the novel where not a great deal really comes to pass. The seasons are what come to pass, and again, that's part of the setting. That's what's going on there. So it's interesting how she chose to just, by focusing on the one, she didn't give nearly so much attention to the fulfillment of the other two. Maybe it's a decision you have to make.
I felt like Sylvia has a mental illness, and that's why we don't know her. And I like
Mental illness.
This is sort of very thought disorder. And that's why I thought we don't know because she's sort of, you're talking about human reality, there's a lot of characteristics of it. And that's why I thought that you don't contain her in a knowable.
Yeah, she's, I mean, again, the word that keeps getting used by the girl narrator looking at her and trying to describe her, she is transient, but at the same time, she doesn't want to lose her. She doesn't want Sylvie, whatever Sylvie is, or whatever her faults or difficulties may be, she doesn't want to lose her.
No.
You know, the way that the grandmother, I wish there'd been more of the grandmother. When she's hanging the clothes out on that line in the wind at the beginning and thinking about going to pick wildflowers with her husband, she's a remarkable character. And there's just not enough of her. She was gone too soon in the novel. And I understood, you know, gone too soon in terms of the girls too. But I wanted more time with her, and I felt that by getting to know Sylvia a bit better, I would have more of a handle on Sylvie, but we're left without that possibility. And I mean, sure, you know, the sort of sitting with her coat, eating in the dark, you know, the refusal to be in the light, there is, you know, but once you start trying to reach for what, in terms of a character or in terms indeed of the plot or the setting, when you start trying to reach for what normal is in this novel, you know, all bets are kind of off. So it's really hard to analyze, let alone to diagnose. You know, there's you can recognize though that she is assuming a responsibility of which she realizes, I think, she's not capable, you know, and yet she sticks with it. And I love it's, you have to laugh, the instance of the first of her excuse notes that she writes to Lucille, when Lucille has been out of school. This is kind of classic Sylvie to me. I have so many pages turned down, I have no idea exactly where it is, but when they're trying to go back to school, and she's written a note to excuse Lucille. Hang on. She says, you know, she couldn't sleep. Here it is. Look at this, Lucille said. It's the beginning of chapter 5. Look at this, Lucille said. We were walking to school together. Lucille was Sylvie's note. It was a piece of flowered stationery folded over twice. A very lady. On it, Sylvie had written in her loopy, liquid hand, "Please excuse Lucille's absence. She had pains in her wrists and knees, a buzzing in her ears, a sore tongue, faintness, a stomachache, and double vision, but no fever or loss of appetite. I did not call the doctor because she always seemed quite well by 9:30 or 10 in the morning." You know, and that's she's untidy. She's beyond untidy. She's dirty, I think, a lot of the time. She's uncared for. When the girls call her attention to her red, weather-beaten hands, Lucille says, "You should use hand lotion." And Sylvie puts her hands in her pockets. Do you remember that detail? She puts them away from the children, and then she buys herself some gloves at the store. I find her, yes, very damaged, and I'm not sure by what or how, because we haven't gotten to know her. We've missed that we've seen her as the girl with long brown hair, and then she's gone away, and she's married. She's come back home one time, we've heard, to marry someone named Fisher, and there are no photographs. And then nobody knows where she is. When they put out kind of an APB in the newspapers, you get that letter from her saying she's at the Lost Hills Hotel in Billings, Montana. And we know nothing about her during that gap from about, it seems like 15 is the last time we see her, to 35. We don't know what her life has been. We understand that she's damaged, that she is ill, I think. That's fair. But she's so gracious. And it's a strange word to use in the context of this novel, because it's not a word that appears that I can remember in this novel, but she's very loving. There's not a lot of talk about love in this book. Nobody loves anything or anyone that I can recall.
Have you read Hideous Kinky by Esther Freud?
No, I
Right.
haven't. I've seen the movie.
don't bother with the movie. The book is wonderful.
Yeah.
But anyway, the book describes this woman who is absolutely enchanting to the children,
Mhm.
but she's taking them into a really horrendous situation,
Mhm.
and they end up begging on the street, and they do all kinds of things. So I think the pictures of the adults are like the pictures that children have of their mothers and fathers.
Huh.
We haven't a clue what our mothers and fathers are really like. We see them as in terms of what they do,
For us.
and this is what what those two children see Sylvie in terms of what she does, and Lucille recognizes immediately that what she does is really kooky.
Yes.
And she says, I've got to get out. And the only thing that Ruthie can do is to identify with it.
Yes.
Because that's, the need is so strong. So I think the book is a kind of tragic,
Mhm.
I mean,
Mhm.
very beautiful. I love this book,
Mhm.
but a very tragic view of what a child like that had to go through and
Agreed.
end up on the road.
Mhm.
I don't think that's a life that we want to recommend for people. I don't think it's
No.
beautiful
Yeah.
in the end.
Yeah. Yeah, I think if you wanted to read Freedom and Possibility and finally getting out of Fingerbone, it doesn't outweigh everything else. At the beginning, the grandmother says, she tells the girls, and I think it's her own 3 girls who are all still at home at the beginning, Molly, Helen, and Sylvie. She says, as long as you've got a roof over your head, you'll have plenty to worry about, but it won't be that bad.
Yeah.
There's something, I'm paraphrasing, but something to that effect.
Yeah.
And that phrase really registers with you at the end when she's looking from the train to see what was her house, what is still her house, Someone else is living there, but legal title to the house has not been relinquished. There's talk about who owns it, but the supposition by the townspeople is that Sylvie and Ruth have gone into the lake, that they're dead, that they're missing, presumed dead, right? And where do you put that? Well, that's Rip Van Winkle, isn't it? Old Rip Van Winkle, young Rip Van Winkle then, old Rip Van Winkle now. Does no one know Rip Van Winkle? When you do go home again, how do you substantiate who you are?
I'm willing to entertain a possibility that they end up having a life that is totally satisfying to them. I wouldn't recommend it for Lucille. I wouldn't recommend it for anybody. And I think by saying that she's diseased or mentally disturbed keeps us from examining exactly who she is and what pushes her in the directions and whether she does in fact live the life that she needs to live.
Now, you mean
I
Ruth
don't-
or Sylvie?
Both.
Either, okay.
Either.
Yeah.
I have no idea.
Well,
But I'm
it's
willing
hard,
to-
as you pointed out before, it's hard to figure out who they are because we get brushstrokes of character, but we don't get, maybe we don't get enough to go on, particularly with Sylvie.
Right.
We get her behaviors, we get her dress, we get her gestures, we get the things she does for the children. Some of her comments are, I would invite you to sit down on the sofa, but it's full of water. She's there in this quirky, gracious way. She's trying to be the lady of the house, filling her mother's place. And at one point, Ruth says, "I can't imagine what it felt like for her to come back to this house." And there's that constant recognition. What is this like for Sylvie? That's a very suppressed question. It's not very nice for Sylvie. That's my thinking. It's
I
pretty
don't know.
horrible for Sylvie. But that's my supposition. I
Seems
can't
to
I
me
can't
that-
tell from what's here.
The most unhappy and unresolved person in the book is Lucille.
Yeah, Lucille, who lashes out in a way to make her own way, who cleans the house, who wants her to be bright light so that she can see what's going on in there, and who ultimately up and leaves, moves in with a teacher. and becomes like the other teenagers. Doesn't even talk to her sister anymore. She and Ruth don't talk at school. Don't sit together, don't communicate. And when that happened, I actually thought back to the grandfather's two sisters living together in their hotel in this kind of shabby gentility. Not even, it's poverty is what they're living in, but they're treated nicely by the doorman, and there are still silver candlesticks in the hallway of the hotel. So that's the place they want to go back to. They can't wait to get back there. And they leave as soon, pretty much, as Sylvie shows up. I found myself kind of imagining Lucille and Ruth as old women alone together, you know, living in
Together.
this house. Yeah, and I, looking at the two old, great aunts, and I just couldn't imagine it. I couldn't imagine it. Lucille is the one who says we've spent too much time together, we're too close, I need something else. But it's interesting to me, as a side note to what you're saying, that's maybe more important than I thought on my first reading of this book. In any other novel that features coming of age of two young women this age, two girls becoming young women, I mean, there are details about, Lucille's breasts growing and she's annoyed with this. You don't get Ruth's personal details at all. But there's not even a blip about, and when I had my first period, I went to Sylvie to talk to her about it and to find out what was going on. Nothing. There's absolutely no language that intimates anything is going on to make them grown-ups, and that, now that I think back on it, that really surprises me about this novel, because any other novel, you read something like Jeffrey Eugenides' The Virgin Suicides, and I mean, maybe that's an extreme example, but you know what I'm saying, it's all about, and anybody else writing about young women coming of age, you have that in here, and it's just, they're out with their creels fishing and wearing overalls, and it's much more of a Huck and Jim kind of equation, really. It's strange. Interestingly ungendered for a book about girls. Funny, that. Anyway.
I don't know how much the book and the movie coincide, but what I'm thinking is that there is a coming of age. Lucille starts printing and making herself look better, and the other one doesn't care. And
Lucille's a younger one, of course,
right,
so she's
it's
kind of
just
trying to bully her sister into at least brush her hair. Let's go
right,
get you some styling gel.
And
Yeah.
I'm not seeing, that strong, like she's taking over the mother role or something, but I am seeing that she's coming of age where the other one is not.
Yeah, good point, but that's all surface, that's like makeup and brushing your hair. I'm talking about like how their bodies feel and what their bodies are doing. That's kind of, that Robinson doesn't write about that at all.
You know what the
And that's
water's
odd.
doing though, don't you?
The what?
You know what the water's doing, what the trees are doing?
Oh, sure, you
How
know.
the grass is
There you go,
growing.
back to the setting,
Yeah.
indeed. Yeah, it's true.
No, that-
And you know what the natural world is doing, like what the
Right.
animals are doing and
Right.
everything. Yes, it's true. And
Hardly
it's a
any
strange
novel-
disconnect or omission.
I'm sorry,
Yeah, no, go
hardly any novel, even the ones that we, coming of age and discussing it physically in a novel, unless it's a how-to or how to deal with it. It's very rare in this type of literature.
Oh,
Like
no,
talking about. I mean, well, in horror stories, yes, but not in
It's
this
rare
type
in
of
the
literature.
Victorian novel. Like in Jane Eyre, you're not going to have her talking about things like that because Bronte's not
Okay,
going to
but-
go there. But in any novel that's been written that I can think of since sort of the early 1960s, where you've got a character who's crossing, it's all about pimples and braces and that, like the changes that your body is going through. And for girls, they're always going to talk about your first period.
But
and
in this
how
type of
happens.
novel,
And Carrie,
men
not
are
just horror
absent.
stories.
Yeah, but not just horror.
Not just
but
horror stories.
Men are absent. Does that men are absent here in
But
this
that shouldn't
discussion of
matter,
this book?
No,
No, it shouldn't at all. It
Yeah.
matters obviously to the novelist who wrote it, and for some reason she decided to keep them at bay.
Yeah,
and
it's-
that's a metaphor for
Yeah,
them.
I was just throwing out there
at bay. Just
Yeah.
keep them at bay, and have these men over there, and then because it is of coming of age, not necessarily physically, but emotionally. Like, what are we to do as a country, as a people, as this place? That's from what you've been talking about. I don't see that there is absolutely any need to include any sort of reference to that, because the coming of age is precisely, we're not there yet.
I'm just saying I'm surprised not to see it, because it's something
But they're not
that,
there yet.
Yeah.
They put on the makeup and you said it's passé.
Good point. They're emotionally and
They're not
otherwise,
there
there's
yet.
a lot of
As the
aging in
country's
this novel,
not
but
there.
not coming of age.
They're not.
You get the sense that Sylvie at 35 is kind of like Sylvie when we last saw her, only older with more lines in her face. There's something about her that hasn't ripened, certainly. And you feel that with Ruth, and to a degree with Lucille, you know, as
The
well.
long hair and the
There's an
references.
arrested kind of feeling, perhaps.
Yeah, that ambivalence that you said, that you never know, you know, the child narrator, you really don't know what the age is. So that's part of the point. So, you know, the coming of age details don't need to be there, because it's another type of coming of age, and you don't get it. That's the point. The novel doesn't give you that. It doesn't follow through in the sense that, okay, this is resolved. We don't know. They just went and discovered and explored, and it's they never did come of age, maybe.
Maybe not.
Maybe there's an absolute shunning of sexuality in general. Like the men are not there, the girls are not grown, the adults are kind of still childlike. They're, even in the suicide, it's kind of like a shunning of life and
Yeah.
that kind of.
Good point.
Well, I mean, it is a shunning.
Yeah, it is.
So it's,
There's one really powerful moment very near the end where Ruth is kind of imagining back about, you know, the whole idea of engendering, and her, there's sort of a paragraph and a half about the image, or her thinking about the image of her growing inside her mother's body. But that's the only,
That's freaky.
and I'm not sure what it's about. You know, I'm not sure why it's there. I know that it surprised me, and it seemed almost like something that the novelist had forgotten and suddenly needed to put in before the end. It felt that way to me. Maybe that's me being cynical, but exactly what you're saying. Yeah, there is a shunning of sexuality, of development, of in some ways maturity, but it's not the kind of shunning of maturity that you've gotten in, let's say, what used to be called boy books. You know, it's not kind of the Peter Pan-ish, I don't want to grow up feeling. It's that I can't grow up. It's that there's, you know, with all this natural freedom around them, there's something so stunted
maybe
about.
that's whatever was, partially happens. Maybe that's partially what happens emotionally when there are no men in their lives. I mean,
And no mother, huge.
well, no
yes.
mother, but also maybe there's something for, you know, girls growing up without men, not having that sort of example.
And the implication is clear that Stone is still alive. I mean, he's writing letters to the mother. She tears them up. You know, there's no testimony that he's dead. Quite the contrary. And Sylvie also. You know, they finally, late in the novel, Ruth and Lucille both ask her about Fisher. You know, where is? Well, you know, I am still married, she says. No, you know, I have no reason to think he's dead. You know, so it's almost worse in that they're still around. You know, there's still the possibility, or at least there's a de jure connection, but no de facto one.
Isn't that the whole thing with Ulysses also? Like the absent father, but he's always there, you know, he's coming back. Isn't there?
Oh, well,
Something about like at least you know that that there is father.
Well, for me, Ulysses is different because Stephen Dedalus has a father who we see quite often in Ulysses. We see Simon Dedalus hanging out with his friends. We see him walking around town, but he's not the father Stephen particularly wants. And I guess in a basic critical equation, that's where Bloom comes in. Bloom's own father has died, however, and his son has also died. So yeah, there's definitely a fathers and sons search that goes on in Ulysses, but nobody's searching here. Nobody's particularly searching. They acknowledge it, but nobody's looking You know, it's the not looking for that unsettles me. This is a really disturbing novel in a lot of ways. And I finished it, you know, kind of missing both my grandmothers and missing my father, and just, you know, roiled. I finished this novel. I was roiled up. I really was. I wasn't that emotionally connected to the characters, but I was distressed, you know. And there was no resolution, I felt, at the end. It was not an irresolute novel, but an unresolved novel. Yes.
I was just going to add to what you said, because I was thinking the same thing, and I read this a long time ago, so it's kind of like putting it together. But I think part of the lack of males, is part of what allows them to be these people. If a male in your life or in your family's life or one-on-one brings something to that relationship that these people don't have. And
Even something different.
even something different,
Whatever
and
that
maybe
is.
it allows you a certain freedom that you would not otherwise have.
It would certainly be a buffer, I think, between them and the town. You know, if you had a man's word for something, the sheriff would go away. So it would be a very
Exactly.
different novel in that sense, yeah.
And exactly, and then to her point, that wasn't the novel she wanted to write.
Right, yeah. So they're not there.
Yeah. And they're not supposed to be.
No, they're not, but we do notice the absence.
And we do notice the
And the
absence.
constant presence up in the lake, you know,
Yes.
the fact of the train in the lake.
Yeah.
It seems almost by the end of it that it seems so long ago that it was a story that never happened, you know?
Yeah.
It's, what's a made up story and can you believe what you read in the newspapers? When the grandmother dies, all they have is a picture of basically a bunch of the train staff, because that was the big important incident, you know? And it becomes such a jumble, even 20 years back, 30 years back. What gets handed down, the way a story gets told and passed around. I tell a story to you, you tell a story to her, she tells a story, and then it comes back to me, and the details have changed. It's kind of like that telephone game.
Telephone, right?
And what you came back was a jumble, you know? It doesn't take that long.
You mentioned that they look back at the house that it used to live in.
Near the end.
She disappeared. I think we need to do that too.
I hate to spoil it for you.
Only in the nicest
Yeah, a fire is set, but there is, it is burning down the house is a cliche. And there is something that is resurrected from it in the book. And there is you know, the bones of the house, at least in that space, have been rebuilt. So it's reoccupied.
Any other questions before we wrap it up?
No, thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you all.